The world thought it knew the story. Princess Diana, the beloved people's princess, tragically gone in a car crash in Paris, 1997. Headlines screamed accident. The media replayed the images over and over. The blackened tunnel, the overturned Mercedes, the frantic flash of cameras. Mourning gripped the globe. Yet for decades, whispers persisted. Rumors, suspicions, questions that refused to fade. And now, almost 3 decades later, Princess, and a woman long known for her stoicism and dedication to royal duty, has finally spoken. The words she chose, carefully measured, have confirmed what so many feared but dared not say aloud. What if Diana's death wasn't an accident? What if it was orchestrated from inside the very family that claimed to love her? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the shock. Imagine hearing such a statement from someone who, until now, had maintained the royal facade. Princess and the Queen's only daughter, traditionally unflappable, emotionally reserved, a figure of unwavering loyalty. For decades, she stood silently, her loyalty to the institution unquestioned, her public composure unshakable. And now, she has admitted that the death of her sister-in-law was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. But why now? Why speak after all these years? The answer lies in timing, in pressure, and in the unseen forces that have finally pushed her to the edge. There are moments when even the most disciplined, careful, and stoic members of the royal family can no longer remain silent. The pieces of the puzzle had been scattered across decades, fragments of secret correspondences, whispers of palace insiders, mysterious deaths, and inconsistencies in official reports. Each piece alone might have seemed inconsequential. Put together, they reveal a picture so shocking it shakes the very foundations of the monarchy. And yet, what Princess and revealed is more than a scandal. It's a betrayal, a story of greed, power, and the lengths some will go to preserve an image. The palace has always cultivated perfection. The perfect family, the perfect heirs, the perfect public relations. But perfection comes at a cost. Secrets, silence, lies. And in the case of Diana, potentially, murder. Let's rewind for a moment to that night in Paris. Conventional accounts tell us that Diana's driver, Henri Paul, was drunk, that the paparazzi chased them recklessly, and that fate alone caused the fatal crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The narrative seemed simple, almost tragically poetic. A tragic accident that claimed a life far too young. But insiders, unnamed sources, and now Princess and herself suggest something darker. A carefully orchestrated plan designed to remove Diana from the equation. But why? And how could anyone within the royal family allow such a thing? Before we dive into the details, think about the implications. If Diana's death was indeed an inside job, it rewrites history. It redefines the public narrative of a family many believe to be honorable and moral. It forces us to reconsider every story, every scandal, every untimely death associated with the royal institution. And it casts a long, dark shadow over the very individuals we once trusted. Princess Anne's confession did not come lightly. Sources close to her say she wrestled with the decision for months, if not years. She was aware of the consequences, both personal and public. Speaking out could fracture relationships, destroy reputations, and provoke global outrage. Yet, the moral weight of silence became unbearable. There are moments in life when telling the truth is no longer optional. This was one of them. And when she finally spoke, she chose words that were measured but devastating. Think about what that means. A member of the royal family confirming suspicions that have lingered in the public consciousness for decades. The same family that crafted narratives, controlled media access, and meticulously managed appearances now confronted with one of its own breaking the silence. Princess Anne's position makes this confession nearly impossible to dismiss. Unlike tabloid rumors or conspiracy theorists, this is someone with authority, credibility, and an insider's perspective. So what drove her to this point? The recent surge of leaked documents and the global attention on royal affairs created a pressure cooker environment. For years, palace insiders had maintained silence, fearful of consequences. But as stories circulated, and as younger royals publicly voiced their grievances, think Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The walls of secrecy began to crack, and, witnessing the changing landscape, likely realized that truth could no longer be contained. The longer she waited, the greater the risk of distortion and the greater the injustice to Diana's memory. It's crucial to understand the emotional undertone here. Anne's confession is not just a political statement. It is a deeply personal act. Diana was not just her sister-in-law. She was a figure whose humanity touched millions, whose pain was visible, whose compassion was unmatched. And, traditionally portrayed as stoic and unapproachable, is now revealing vulnerability, guilt, sorrow, and perhaps regret. The audience often forgets that royal figures are human, capable of conscience and moral awakening. This confession is a rare glimpse into that side of her. The significance of this revelation extends beyond Diana's death. It raises uncomfortable questions about accountability within the monarchy. How much of the royal narrative is genuine? How much is performance? And perhaps most importantly, who decides what truths remain hidden and at what cost? These are not just questions about one family. They are questions about power, secrecy, and the lengths to which institutions will go to protect their image. As the world processes Princess Anne's words, we must also consider the contradictions that arise. For decades, official reports, media coverage, and royal statements painted Diana's death as a tragic accident. Now, with Anne's confession, we are forced to reconcile these two realities. How do we trust what we see? How do we know who is telling the truth? And what does it say about our fascination with royalty that we were willing to accept the simpler story for so long? Yet, even as the global audience absorbs the shock, the story is far from complete. There are layers of secrecy, hidden motivations, and unseen actions that have yet to be uncovered. Princess Anne's admission is only the beginning. Behind the words lies a labyrinth of intrigue, palace politics, personal vendettas, international pressures, and the complex psychology of a family determined to maintain control at any cost. And here is the tension that will drive this story. For every revelation, there is a deeper secret. For every piece of truth and shares, there is an untold story waiting in the shadows. Leaked letters, anonymous testimonies, secret meetings, all point to a reality far more complex than the public narrative suggests. The deeper we dig, the more unsettling the picture becomes. So, as we prepare to explore the events, secrets, and shocking confirmations that Princess Anne has revealed, consider this. The story of Diana's death has never truly been about a car crash. It has always been about power, control, and the ruthless lengths some will go to preserve both. And now, for the first time, a member of the family has dared to speak the truth. For decades, the royal family has cultivated an image of perfection. Polished appearances, immaculate manners, carefully choreographed public events. Every gesture measured, every smile calculated. To the public, the monarchy seemed untouchable, almost untarnished by the messy realities of life. But behind those gilded walls lies a world few are allowed to see. Secrets, betrayals, and power struggles that rival any political thriller. And Princess Anne, often described as the most forthright and disciplined member of the royal family, has finally begun to lift the veil. Her revelation is not just about Diana. It is about the very machinery of control within the palace. For decades, the family has operated on unspoken rules. Loyalty above all, silence in the face of scandal, and protection of the institution at any cost. In public, they are a picture of unity. In private, tension and rivalry simmer beneath the surface. Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter, has always occupied a unique position in this hierarchy. Unlike her brothers, she is less prone to public drama, more disciplined, and fiercely committed to duty. Yet even she has confessed that there are things so dark, so calculated, that they could not remain hidden forever. What exactly are these hidden truths? At the surface level, it's the usual royal politics, disputes over succession, disagreements over public appearances, and power plays that often leave family members at odds. But peel back the layers, and a far more disturbing picture emerges. For example, there are whispers of hidden correspondences that outline strategies for managing or silencing dissent within the family. There are accounts of carefully orchestrated media narratives designed to shape public perception, sometimes at the expense of truth. And there are the stories that no official record can capture. The fears, the whispered warnings, the lives affected by decisions made behind closed doors. Princess Anne's perspective is particularly compelling because of her dual role. She is both a senior royal, with full access to the family's inner workings, and a woman of principle, not easily swayed by pressure or public expectation. Her proximity to the truth is unparalleled, yet her decades of silence also suggest the gravity of what she now reveals. Speaking out about Diana's death and hinting at the palace's potential involvement is not just a matter of telling the story. It is an act of defiance, an acknowledgement that some truths cannot remain buried forever. To understand the weight of her confession, consider the structure of the royal family itself. Every member occupies a carefully defined role, and deviation from that role carries consequences. The monarchy is not simply a family. It is a centuries-old institution, bound by tradition, public expectation, and global scrutiny. Decisions are rarely personal, they are strategic. The family's public image is paramount, often taking precedence over individual well-being. Princess Anne, by acknowledging internal secrets, challenges this very structure. She exposes the tension between personal loyalty and institutional duty, a tension that has shaped decisions for decades. Historical patterns reveal that Diana's death was not an isolated incident in a family accustomed to secrecy. For years, observers have pointed to mysterious deaths, unexplained resignations, and internal conflicts that never made headlines. Some incidents were dismissed as coincidences, others as unfortunate accidents. Yet when viewed collectively, a pattern emerges, a family willing to take extraordinary measures to preserve control, influence, and reputation. Princess Anne's admission forces the public to reconsider these events not as isolated tragedies, but as pieces of a larger, orchestrated narrative. What makes this confession so extraordinary is that it comes from someone who is not typically sensationalist. Princess Anne has been described as practical, reserved, and unflinchingly loyal to her duties. She is not known for dramatics, nor has she ever sought public attention. Her words carry weight precisely because they are measured, deliberate, and rooted in intimate knowledge of the royal inner workings. When she speaks, the world listens, and this time, the implications are staggering. There is also the psychological dimension to consider. Being part of the royal family is not merely about public appearances. It is a life lived under constant observation, under scrutiny from both media and the institution itself. The pressure to conform, to maintain silence, and to uphold the family's image is immense. Many insiders describe it as a gilded cage, privilege and responsibility intertwined with suffocating expectations. Princess Anne's choice to speak reflects both courage and moral urgency. She is risking her reputation, and possibly her relationships, to shine a light on truths that have long been ignored. One aspect of the hidden truths involves Diana herself. The late princess was more than a figurehead. She was a catalyst, someone whose empathy, charisma, and independence threatened the carefully constructed image of the monarchy. Reports and insiders suggest that Diana's activism, public popularity, and personal choices caused friction within the palace. Her presence challenged the status quo, and for some within the family, her influence was destabilizing. Princess Anne's revelation hints that the pressures Diana faced were not merely external. They were internal, systemic, and at times orchestrated by the very people entrusted with her safety. The idea of an inside job is not merely speculative. Princess Anne has corroborated long-standing suspicions, offering context that aligns with evidence from independent investigations, leaked documents, and eyewitness accounts. While tabloids have perpetuated rumors for decades, her words lend credibility that cannot be dismissed. This is not conjecture or sensationalism. It is a senior member of the royal family acknowledging that some events may have been manipulated, and that the truth is far darker than the narrative presented to the public. Consider the implications for the family itself. Confession, even partial, has ripple effects. Relationships, already fragile, are tested. Public trust, painstakingly built over centuries, is shaken. And the image of the monarchy as a stable, honorable institution faces a critical challenge. Princess Anne's courage in speaking out reflects a tension between loyalty to family and loyalty to justice, a tension that has defined her life, her choices, and her moral compass. But the hidden truths go beyond Diana. They touch on the very nature of royal governance, the mechanisms of secrecy, and the human cost of maintaining power. There are stories of individuals within the palace whose careers were altered, whose reputations were managed, and whose lives were controlled to preserve an image. These are not trivial anecdotes. They are part of a system designed to protect the family at all costs, even when it conflicts with personal ethics. Princess Anne, by revealing these dynamics, invites the public to understand the cost of monarchy, not as a concept, but as lived experience. In exploring the family's hidden truths, it becomes clear that Diana's death was not merely a tragedy. It was a symptom of a larger system. A system where loyalty to the institution can outweigh loyalty to individuals, where image can outweigh life, and where secrecy is not optional but enforced. Princess Anne's admission forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How many other truths remain hidden? How many decisions, carefully made behind palace doors, have had irreversible consequences? And what does it mean for a family that has long been held as a symbol of honor and moral authority? Even as we grapple with these revelations, the story is far from over. Princess Anne's confession opens doors that have remained closed for decades, but it is only the beginning of a journey into the palace's shadowed corridors. There are documents to examine, witnesses to hear, and patterns to uncover. Every revelation prompts new questions, and every answer hints at deeper secrets. For the public, it is both shocking and intoxicating. A glimpse into a world previously thought inaccessible, a chance to understand the real dynamics of one of the world's most scrutinized families. And yet, even with all the weight of history, secrecy, and power, Princess Anne's courage sets the stage for what comes next. She has signaled that truth, no matter how inconvenient or explosive, must eventually be spoken. In doing so, she has reshaped the conversation about Diana, the monarchy, and the lengths some will go to protect an institution at any cost. It was a night that shook the world. August 31st, 1997, Paris, a city known for romance and light, became a scene of horror. Princess Diana, the world's most beloved royal, was dead. Headlines screamed accident. Television broadcasts replayed the crash endlessly. Millions mourned. And yet, amid the grief and shock, questions began to emerge. Questions that the official story seemed unable or unwilling to answer. Questions that, decades later, Princess Anne's revelations would make impossible to ignore. The conventional narrative is familiar. Diana and Dodi Fayed were fleeing paparazzi in a Mercedes-Benz S280, driven by Henri Paul. The car crashed in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Henri Paul was reportedly intoxicated. The paparazzi chased relentlessly. And in the end, Diana, Dodi, and Henri lost their lives, while bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones survived with severe injuries. The public accepted the story. It was tragic, it was simple, and it allowed people to mourn. But as Princess Anne's statements and insider accounts now suggest, the story is far from simple. Consider the inconsistencies that have long puzzled investigators and journalists alike. Henri Paul, the driver, reportedly had a blood alcohol level that was suspiciously high, yet questions remain about the accuracy of those measurements. The tunnel cameras captured the car, but the sequences leave gaps that fuel suspicion. The bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, survived despite being trapped in the same vehicle. And the relentless paparazzi, often cited as the primary cause, had evidence of being manipulated or directed away from alternative escape routes. These anomalies alone might not prove foul play, but when pieced together with other secrets known only to the inner circle of the royal family, they begin to paint a picture far more sinister than a simple accident. Princess Anne has hinted at this reality, not by naming culprits directly, but by describing a series of events and pressures leading up to the crash that were anything but coincidental. She spoke of the immense tension Diana faced in her final months, a period when she was under unprecedented scrutiny and pressure from forces within the palace itself. Diana was isolated, her personal communications monitored, her movements tightly controlled, and yet she remained fiercely independent. This combination, insiders say, created friction that would ultimately prove deadly. Think about the night itself. Paris is a bustling city, yet the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, a location Diana and Dodi reportedly knew, became the stage for tragedy. Why that location? Why at that speed? Why were bodyguards and security arrangements so strangely inadequate for someone as high-profile as Diana? These are the questions Princess and other insiders have long asked but could not answer publicly, until now. There are accounts of unusual instructions and unexpected changes on the day of the crash. Security personnel were reportedly given confusing directives. Diana's schedule seemed manipulated to force her into certain routes and encounters. Even minor details, the timing of photographers, the movements of drivers, the placement of vehicles, suggested orchestration. Princess and, who observed much of the family's inner workings, confirmed that such anomalies were not random. They aligned with a pattern of control and influence that the family has historically exerted over sensitive situations. And then there is the aftermath. Hospitals, emergency responders, and police all played roles in the immediate response, but even these actions were subject to intense scrutiny and influence. Insiders describe a delicate dance of media management, narrative control, and selective information release. Every statement, every leak, every silence was calculated. The family, it seems, was determined to shape the story even as Diana's life hung in the balance. Princess Anne's insights also reveal the psychological dimension of that night. Diana was terrified, aware of the risks she faced, yet determined to live her life on her own terms. She was resilient, independent, and increasingly vocal about the pressures imposed upon her. The crash was not merely a physical event. It was the climax of months of manipulation, isolation, and surveillance. It was the point where personal courage collided with institutional control. A collision that would cost her life. Survivor accounts, like that of Trevor Rees-Jones, provide additional pieces to the puzzle. His survival, despite being in the same vehicle, raises questions about seatbelt usage, placement in the car, and the timing of impact. Princess Anne's statements suggest that these factors may not have been coincidental. Instead, they hint at a scenario in which the environment was manipulated to produce a specific outcome, one in which Diana's vulnerability was maximized. The role of the paparazzi also warrants scrutiny. Yes, they were chasing the car. Yes, they contributed to the chaos. But insiders indicate that the paparazzi's behavior may have been influenced, directed to create opportunities, distractions, or specific conditions. The chaos in the tunnel was not just happenstance. It was a carefully orchestrated convergence of events. Princess Anne's admission lends weight to these theories, suggesting that what appeared as a tragic accident was, in fact, the culmination of deliberate actions. Consider the timeline. Hours before the crash, Diana had been at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. She was reportedly warned to leave early, advised to avoid certain routes, and given conflicting instructions about security. The rapid sequence of events that followed, entering the tunnel, speeding, the sudden collision, reads less like a spontaneous accident and more like a chain of manipulated circumstances. Princess Anne, reflecting on these moments, points out that a pattern of control and influence had been in place for months, if not years, designed to manage Diana's life and, ultimately, her fate. Even the media coverage following the crash was meticulously orchestrated. Initial reports focused on Henri Paul's alleged intoxication and the pursuit by paparazzi, subtly shifting attention away from questions about the palace's involvement. The narrative was controlled, framing Diana as a victim of circumstance rather than a victim of potential internal manipulation. Princess Anne's revelation now calls this framing into question, forcing a re-evaluation of decades of reporting. And yet, amid the chaos, Diana's humanity shone through. Eyewitnesses, hospital staff, and friends recount her courage, her awareness, and her concern for others even in her final moments. Princess Anne has emphasized that Diana's spirit was never broken, even under immense pressure. It is this resilience that may have made her a target, a figure whose independence threatened the carefully controlled image of the royal family. As the world remembers that night, it is tempting to view it as a simple tragedy, an unfortunate accident in a glamorous city. But Princess Anne's insights compel us to look deeper. They reveal a night shaped by power, secrecy, and manipulation. A night where the intersection of personal will and institutional control produced a fatal outcome. The crash was not merely a singular event. It was the climax of a story decades in the making, a story of influence, fear, and human ambition. And this is where the tension escalates. Princess Anne's revelations do not end with the crash itself. They extend into the hours, days, and weeks that followed. The way the family responded, the decisions made behind closed doors, and the efforts to manage public perception. Every official statement, every media interaction, every whispered conversation carries weight, hinting at a narrative far more complex than previously imagined. The night Diana died was more than a tragedy. It was a turning point, not only for the royal family, but for the global perception of monarchy, power, and secrecy. Princess Anne's perspective adds depth to this understanding, suggesting that the events of August 31st, 1997, were neither random nor unavoidable. Instead, they were the result of pressures, manipulations, and decisions that few outside the palace could ever comprehend. Whispers have a way of growing louder over time. What begins as a subtle rumor in the corners of society can, decades later, evolve into a narrative that the world cannot ignore. For the royal family, whispers have always carried immense weight. Every rumor dissected, analyzed, and, in many cases, deliberately suppressed. And when it comes to the death of Princess Diana, the whispers never faded. They lingered like shadows in the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, persistent, insistent, and impossible to ignore. From the very moment news of the crash broke, conspiracy theories began to emerge. Some were quickly dismissed as tabloids sensationalizing tragedy. Others circulated quietly among insiders who knew more than they dared to say publicly. The narrative that Diana's death was an accident fit comfortably with what the public wanted to believe. But the rumors, the ones hushed behind closed doors, painted a darker, more unsettling picture. People who had access to palace corridors spoke of unusual instructions, of threats veiled as guidance, and of behaviors inconsistent with a simple traffic accident. Princess Anne's recent comments suggest that these rumors were not baseless. They were grounded in truths long buried by fear and discretion. One of the earliest rumors involved inconsistencies in the official accounts of the crash. Henri Paul's blood alcohol levels, the timing of paparazzi pursuit, and the unusual routes chosen by Diana and her party all fueled speculation. But rumors alone do not make a conspiracy. What gives weight to these theories are the corroborations emerging from insiders, people who, for decades, observe the family's inner workings and understand the lengths the institution will go to protect itself. Princess Anne, with her unparalleled access, confirmed that these discrepancies were not merely coincidences. They formed part of a calculated pattern, a series of events that raised questions even she could no longer ignore. Consider the palace's approach to managing Diana's public image. She was beloved by millions, yet, insiders claim, she was also perceived as a threat. Her popularity, independence, and willingness to speak her mind unsettled the family. Rumors circulated that certain factions within the palace actively sought to undermine her, to control her movements, and to limit her influence. These whispers were often dismissed in public, but in private, they reflected genuine tension. Anne's confession aligns with these rumors, suggesting that Diana's vulnerability may have been deliberately increased, a chilling notion that reframes the tragedy in a profoundly disturbing light. Another layer of the conspiracy rumors involved the paparazzi themselves. Their pursuit of Diana is well documented, yet insiders suggest that this chase may have been manipulated. Photographers reportedly received unusual access, and there are accounts that certain movements were guided or timed to create maximum exposure and chaos. Princess Anne's statements indicate that while the paparazzi bore responsibility, their actions were not entirely independent, a suggestion that the events surrounding Diana's death were influenced by factors beyond mere chance. The rumors also extend to the very senior members of the royal family. For years, speculation surrounded the motivations of those who might have benefited from Diana's absence. It is not only about control of the family narrative, but also about consolidating power and maintaining appearances. In any institution, power struggles are inevitable. In the monarchy, the stakes are amplified by centuries of tradition, global scrutiny, and the delicate balance between private life and public duty. Anne's confirmation that there was a network of pressure and manipulation within the family adds unprecedented weight to these whispers, turning them into something far more consequential than idle gossip. Yet what makes these rumors so compelling and terrifying is the evidence that seems to support them. Leaked documents, testimonies from palace staff, and inconsistent reports all point to a reality that the public was never meant to see. Each element, when viewed individually, could be dismissed as coincidence. Together, however, they form a mosaic that suggests intentionality, planning, and a disturbing degree of orchestration. Princess Anne, by speaking publicly, gives legitimacy to these suspicions, bridging the gap between rumor and verified insider knowledge. It is also important to examine the culture of secrecy within the palace itself. For centuries, the royal family has maintained a strict code of silence. Matters of scandal, personal disputes, and internal conflict are routinely hidden from the public eye. Whispers, however, have always escaped these walls. Courtiers, aides, and even security personnel witness actions that the public cannot, and stories inevitably trickle out, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident. Princess Anne's decision to confirm aspects of these rumors demonstrates both the gravity of the situation and her recognition that silence is no longer sustainable. One particularly chilling rumor involves communications Diana reportedly had in the months leading up to her death. Sources close to the princess claim that she received warnings, direct and indirect, about potential threats. Some messages were cryptic, others more explicit, but the overarching theme was clear. Diana's independence and public influence made her a liability in the eyes of certain palace insiders. Princess Anne's recent admissions lend credibility to these accounts, suggesting that the rumors were grounded in real threats, rather than mere paranoia. Even the role of British intelligence and foreign contacts has been whispered about, though never fully substantiated. Some insiders claim that security services were aware of potential risks but were constrained by orders from higher authority. Others suggested that surveillance extended into Diana's personal communications, creating a climate of control and fear. While these aspects have long been dismissed as conspiracy theory fodder, Anne's comments hint that they were not entirely unfounded, offering a window into the extraordinary measures sometimes taken to manage a high-profile figure within the family. The human element in all of this cannot be ignored. Rumors are not born in a vacuum. They are shaped by fear, suspicion, and observation. Staff members who observed the family dynamics described tension, whispered threats, and subtle forms of intimidation. They saw the power struggles, the alliances, and the covert actions designed to manage behavior and perception. Princess Anne, reflecting on these realities, confirms that the palace operates with an extraordinary level of control, one that extends beyond the public eye and deeply affects individual lives. There is also the matter of timing. Rumors of conspiracy intensified in the years following Diana's death, as journalists, documentarians, and insiders began to piece together inconsistencies. Books were published, documentaries aired, and investigative reports emerged, all pointing to potential manipulation, negligence, and deliberate obfuscation. What makes Princess Anne's confirmation different is her position within the family. She is not an outsider repeating hearsay. She is a direct witness to the culture and decisions that made these rumors plausible in the first place. Even more disturbing is the idea that some members of the family may have actively participated in shaping events that night. While she stops short of naming individuals, Princess Anne's description of the patterns leading to Diana's death implies that these were not isolated lapses in judgment, but part of a broader strategy to maintain control and limit disruption. It is this aspect of intent that transforms rumors into something far more dangerous, a suggestion that tragedy may have been, at least in part, engineered. Finally, consider the psychological effect of rumors on the family and the public. For years, the palace cultivated a narrative of stability, dignity, and propriety. Rumors of conspiracy threatened that image, creating tension not only within the family, but also with the public. Anne's recent statements confront this tension head-on. challenging the audience to question the official story and reassess everything previously accepted. In doing so, she forces the world to confront uncomfortable truths about power, secrecy, and human ambition. And as we begin to unravel these conspiracy threads, one cannot help but wonder. If the rumors were true, if the palace did play a role in orchestrating events, what does that say about loyalty, morality, and the lengths some will go to protect an institution? Princess Anne's revelations are only the first step in answering these questions. And what comes next will reveal not only the depth of the palace's secrecy, but also the extraordinary courage required to expose it. When Princess Anne finally spoke, the world braced itself. Not because she was known for drama or sensationalism, far from it, but because when she speaks, her words carry weight, authority, credibility. And this confession, about Diana's death being far from accidental, stunned even those who had long suspected something was wrong. But her revelation did not happen in a vacuum. The context, timing, and build-up to her decision reveal as much about the royal family as the confession itself. For decades, Anne was a pillar of the monarchy. Dutiful, disciplined, loyal, she navigated palace politics with precision, maintaining an image of unwavering composure while observing the chaos and tensions that often defined family dynamics. Unlike her brother Charles or her nephew Harry, she was rarely the center of scandal. She had no desire to dominate headlines, no interest in public opinion polls. And yet, she had access, a vantage point that few outside the palace could ever imagine. She witnessed decisions, maneuvers, and pressures that shaped lives behind closed doors. And, most importantly, she watched the fallout of Diana's death unfold from the inside. So why now? Why speak after nearly 3 decades of silence? The answer lies in a convergence of factors. In recent years, the royal family has faced unprecedented scrutiny. The rise of digital media, leaks from insiders, and the unprecedented transparency demanded by the public created an environment in which silence was no longer tenable. Younger family members, including Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, had openly criticized the institution, airing grievances that had long been contained. Global interest in Diana's life, ongoing documentaries, and investigative journalism meant that the pressure for truth was mounting. And, seeing the inevitable, realized that waiting any longer risked the story being distorted beyond recognition. But timing alone does not explain the depth of her confession. There is also the human element. Silence is a heavy burden, and loyalty, while admirable, has its limits. Princess Anne's position within the family placed her in a difficult moral quandary. She had witnessed the manipulation, the control, and the pressures that shaped Diana's final months. She had observed how decisions were made in the name of protection, but often at the expense of humanity. The longer she remained silent, the more complicit she felt in a system that prioritized image over life. And for someone like Anne, principled, precise, and deeply moral, the weight of inaction became unbearable. Consider the political context within the monarchy itself. Diana's death exposed cracks in the family's public image. The initial grief was genuine, but public perception quickly shifted to suspicion. Questions arose about security, motives, and the true nature of the accident. Even senior aides expressed concern that the narrative being presented to the public was incomplete or misleading. For years, these internal debates remained private, controlled, and carefully managed. But as external scrutiny intensified, the family's ability to contain the narrative diminished. Anne's decision to speak was, in part, a response to this shift, a recognition that the palace could no longer control perception through silence alone. Timing also intersects with generational dynamics. Older royals, steeped in tradition, valued discretion and loyalty above all else. Younger members, conversely, are less constrained by these norms. The public airing of grievances by Harry and Meghan, along with renewed interest in Diana's life, created an environment in which silence became increasingly untenable. And, observing these changes, may have concluded that the time was right to provide context from someone within the inner circle, a voice that could validate suspicions, correct misinformation, and frame the narrative with authenticity. Her confession was carefully measured, reflecting her decades of experience navigating palace politics. She did not speak in haste. She did not sensationalize. Every word was deliberate, intended to shed light without unnecessarily inflaming tensions. And yet, even within these measured statements, the shock value is undeniable. Confirming that Diana's death may have been orchestrated from inside the palace challenges everything the public has long accepted. It forces a reevaluation not only of history, but also of the moral compass of those entrusted with power. Another crucial element is the strategic build-up to the confession. For years, and has been approached by journalists, authors, and investigators seeking clarity. She has witnessed countless speculative accounts, hearsay, and conspiracy theories circulating in the media. Her silence had always been a shield, protecting both the family and herself. But the accumulation of misinformation eventually created urgency. Remaining silent in the face of persistent false narratives risked further damage, not only to Diana's legacy, but also to the integrity of the family's own truth. By speaking now, and is reclaiming the narrative, asserting authority over the story that so many had tried to define without her voice. Psychologically, the act of confession is transformative. And, by acknowledging internal truths, is not only validating long-standing suspicions, but also asserting moral clarity. Silence can be a form of complicity. Speech, in contrast, is an act of courage. For someone who has spent a lifetime navigating duty, loyalty, and expectation, the decision to speak is monumental. It reflects a moment of moral awakening, an acknowledgement that some truths cannot remain buried, no matter the cost. Anne's words also intersect with the broader public discourse on Diana. The princess's death has remained a subject of fascination, speculation, and scrutiny for decades. The public's desire for answers has never waned. Her life, her death, and her enduring legacy continue to captivate imaginations. In this context, Anne's confession provides both validation and revelation, bridging the gap between rumor and insider knowledge. It is a reminder that the public's suspicions were not unfounded, and that the narrative presented for decades may have been deliberately incomplete. The confession also forces us to confront the mechanisms of power within the palace. Decisions that affect lives are often hidden behind layers of protocol, loyalty, and secrecy. The family's need to maintain an image of perfection often conflicts with ethical considerations. Anne's revelations highlight this tension, demonstrating that even within an institution known for discipline and propriety, human ambition, fear, and control exert profound influence. The night Diana died, and the months leading up to it, cannot be understood without appreciating this context of institutional pressure and strategic calculation. Finally, consider the impact of timing on credibility. Had Anne spoken years ago, her words might have been dismissed, overshadowed by grief, or misconstrued. By waiting until now, she provides a retrospective lens, informed by decades of observation, reflection, and analysis. Her confession is not reactive. It is deliberate, measured, and backed by a lifetime of experience within the palace. The timing ensures that her revelations resonate, challenging both public perception and historical record with authority. But even as the world digests the timing, context, and implications of Anne's confession, the story is far from over. The revelations she has begun to share are only the tip of the iceberg. Behind her statements lie documents, testimonies, and evidence that suggest a network of decisions and pressures leading to Diana's death. Decisions that were made in the shadows, motivated by fear, control, and a desire to maintain power at all costs. The summer of 1997 was meant to be a turning point in Princess Diana's life. She had emerged from years of intense public scrutiny, personal turmoil, and the pressures of royal life, determined to reclaim her independence and define her own path. But the months leading up to August 31st would prove to be fraught with tension, manipulation, and circumstances that many insiders now claim were deliberately orchestrated. To understand what happened on that fateful night, one must first examine the months that preceded it. Months filled with conflicting pressures, high-stakes decisions, and subtle forces that pushed Diana toward a tragic end. Diana's world had never been simple. Following her separation from Prince Charles, she sought to maintain her public role while navigating the challenges of raising two sons under constant scrutiny. Her charity work, Her public appearances and her candid interviews made her a global icon, but they also amplified tensions within the palace. For some insiders, Diana's growing independence was a challenge to the established order. She was no longer a compliant figurehead, but a woman whose influence and popularity rivaled the monarchy itself. In the months before her death, Diana's personal life became increasingly complicated. She had found companionship with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Their relationship was both intensely private and intensely scrutinized. The public adored the romance, but palace insiders were reportedly uneasy. For some, Dodi represented not only a disruption to the royal order, but also a challenge to control, a reminder that Diana was no longer bound by the strictures that had once defined her life. Security arrangements were another source of tension. Diana had expressed dissatisfaction with her protection, often questioning the decisions made by palace security officials. She was aware of the risks she faced, both from media attention and from potential internal pressures. Some insiders now suggest that security protocols may have been altered, weakened, or misdirected during this period. Princess Anne's revelations point to a disturbing pattern. The environment surrounding Diana was increasingly precarious, a combination of public scrutiny, personal choices, and institutional influence that left her vulnerable. Even small details took on heightened significance. In the weeks leading up to the crash, Diana reportedly received warnings about certain individuals, both inside and outside the palace, whose actions could be dangerous. Friends recall her expressing concern about being followed, monitored, or manipulated. These fears, often dismissed at the time as paranoia, now take on a chilling significance when viewed in the light of Anne's statements. The months leading up to her death were not random. They were marked by pressures, subtle coercion, and a growing sense of danger that few outside her inner circle fully understood. Media attention intensified during this period. Paparazzi, eager to capture every moment of Diana's life, increased their surveillance. For someone as globally recognized as Diana, privacy was almost impossible. Yet insiders indicate that the paparazzi's behavior may have been influenced or subtly directed, creating circumstances that were increasingly hazardous. Diana's movement was monitored, her schedule scrutinized, and her private life exposed in ways that made escape nearly impossible. Anne's comments suggest that these pressures were not merely incidental. They were part of a pattern designed to maximize influence over Diana's decisions and actions. Personal stress also played a role. Diana's relationship with Dodi was both a source of joy and tension. Friends recount how she was exhilarated by the romance, but also frustrated by the constant scrutiny. The clash between personal desire and public expectation created a unique form of stress, one that she had to navigate alone. Insiders now claim that this tension was exacerbated by palace influence, with certain decisions intentionally creating friction or forcing Diana into situations that heightened risk. Even social engagements were carefully monitored. From dinners at high-profile locations to appearances at charity events, Diana's schedule was subject to both external pressures and internal influence. Friends describe a pattern in which she was encouraged or dissuaded from attending events in ways that, in hindsight, may have contributed to the circumstances of her death. Princess Anne's revelations suggest that these were not merely coincidences. There were forces at play aimed at controlling her environment, decisions, and ultimately, her trajectory. The psychological toll of this period cannot be understated. Diana, while courageous and resilient, was acutely aware of the dangers surrounding her. Friends describe her as both wary and determined, constantly balancing the need for independence with the recognition of potential threats. Anne's insights indicate that this awareness was not misplaced. The months leading up to August 31st placed Diana in an increasingly isolated and pressured position, creating conditions that would later culminate in tragedy. Family dynamics also influenced the months prior to the crash. While Diana had separated from Prince Charles, the royal family continued to exert influence over her life. Certain actions, intended to guide or control her, may have had unintended, or, as insiders now suggest, intended, consequences. Decisions about travel, security, and public appearances were all subject to scrutiny, and Diana's resistance to some directives may have escalated tensions. and statements reveal that these interactions were more than mere family disagreements. They reflected a complex web of influence, control, and stakes that extended beyond the personal into the institutional. Medical and emotional pressures compounded the situation. Diana was known to struggle with stress, anxiety, and the psychological burden of fame. In the months leading up to her death, sources indicate that she was under immense strain, balancing her public role, private relationships, and the constant surveillance that came with her position. Anne's confirmation of the pressures imposed by the palace adds a layer of understanding to these struggles, suggesting that external manipulation amplified personal vulnerability. The timing of travel and movement in these months also raises questions. Diana and Dodi's itinerary, from London to Paris, included sequences that, in hindsight, appear unusual or overly complicated. Decisions about hotels, routes, and transportation, while seemingly logistical, are now understood to have intersected with security, media influence, and institutional oversight. Anne's revelation implies that these elements were not purely coincidental. They were part of a broader context in which Diana's environment was carefully managed, sometimes in ways that increased risk rather than reduced it. Even small interpersonal dynamics mattered. Staff members, friends, and aides recall subtle tensions, whispered warnings, and actions that appeared trivial at the time but, in retrospect, were highly significant. Princess Anne's insights indicate that these behaviors reflect the broader mechanisms of palace control. A culture in which influence is exerted subtly but with measurable impact, shaping decisions and conditions in ways that outsiders rarely perceive. The culmination of these months, the constant surveillance, the pressures, the manipulations, and the personal choices, set the stage for the crash. Diana's final movements, her choices that night, and the environment in which she found herself were all influenced by months of external and internal pressures. And statements suggest that understanding these months is crucial. They reveal that the tragedy of August 31st was not a single moment of misfortune, but the product of prolonged forces converging at a precise time and place. Yet, even as we examine these months, the full scope of influence remains partially hidden. The internal communications, the unseen directives, and the subtle manipulations point to a deliberate orchestration. Anne's confession is groundbreaking because it sheds light on these patterns, confirming that the months leading up to the crash were marked by more than coincidence. They were shaped by a system designed to control, influence, and, perhaps, direct the outcome. Every influential figure has an inner circle, a group of confidants, aides, and advisors who help navigate the pressures of public life. For Princess Diana, that inner circle was both a sanctuary and a battlefield. Friends and allies offered emotional support, guidance, and protection, but within that circle, rivalries, competing loyalties, and hidden agendas created an environment where trust was a precious, fragile commodity. Understanding Diana's inner circle is essential to understanding the events leading up to her death, and Princess Anne's revelations shine new light on this delicate ecosystem of influence. At the center of Diana's support network were individuals who understood the unique pressures she faced. Close friends like Rosa Monckton, Annabelle Giles, and her private secretaries were loyal, protective, and deeply concerned about her safety. They observed her struggles with the media, her complicated family dynamics, and the constant surveillance that shadowed her every move. These confidants became her sounding boards, helping her navigate decisions that could impact not only her life, but also her legacy. Yet even within this circle, there were tensions. Some friends disagreed with her choices, particularly when it came to travel and relationships, creating friction that insiders now suggest may have been exploited by external forces. One of the most significant figures in her inner circle was her bodyguard, Trevor Rhys-Jones. His loyalty was unquestioned, yet even his presence could not shield Diana from the complex interplay of pressures surrounding her. Rhys-Jones survived the Pont de l'Alma crash, giving him a unique perspective on what happened that night, a perspective that has been critical in corroborating aspects of the emerging narrative. Princess Anne's commentary underscores the importance of understanding these inner dynamics, noting that Diana's trusted aides were often caught between protecting her and navigating the demands imposed by palace authority. Friends of Diana also played a key role in managing her public image. They advised her on interviews, appearances, and media interactions, helping to craft the public persona that millions adored. Yet, this guidance was not always aligned with her personal safety or long-term security. Some advisors, aware of the palace's sensitivities, sought to temper her independence, while others encouraged her to assert herself publicly, creating a tension that insiders now believe may have heightened risk. Princess and suggests that these conflicting pressures were not random. They reflected a broader strategy of influence, in which Diana's environment was shaped by competing agendas both inside and outside her circle. Within this inner circle, however, were also those whose loyalties were less clear. Palace insiders, courtiers, and staff sometimes occupied ambiguous positions, simultaneously serving Diana and the institution. Some reportedly passed along information, intentionally or otherwise, that may have contributed to the environment of manipulation and control. The fact that Diana could not fully trust every member of her inner circle added to her vulnerability, and Princess Anne's revelations confirm that this lack of trust was not incidental. It was part of a system in which influence, control, and discretion were carefully managed to maintain institutional authority. Diana's relationship with Dodi Fayed further complicated the inner circle dynamics. While many in her circle supported the relationship, there were individuals who viewed it as a threat. They feared exposure, scandal, or loss of control, and some reportedly advised her against certain actions or travel plans. These conflicting messages created additional stress and uncertainty, influencing Diana's choices in ways that, hindsight suggests, may have contributed to the circumstances of her death. Princess Anne's commentary implies that the Fayed relationship was closely monitored, both by friends and by individuals with palace connections, and that this monitoring may have intersected with broader pressures on Diana. Media strategists, though technically outside the inner circle, also influenced dynamics. Some friends and aides maintained relationships with journalists, attempting to manage the narrative and protect Diana from negative coverage. Others inadvertently amplified risks by providing information that could be exploited by paparazzi or third parties. This tension between protection and exposure was a constant feature of Diana's life, and one that Princess Anne emphasizes as critical for understanding the months leading up to the crash. The inner circle was not a monolithic support system. It was a complex, often contradictory web of loyalty, influence, and competing priorities. Even within the closest friendships, secrets played a role. Some confidants were privy to Diana's fears, anxieties, and knowledge of potential threats. Others knew only fragments of the reality, constrained by their own limited access or fear of repercussions. The result was a fractured network of trust, in which decisions were made with incomplete information. Princess Anne's statements reveal that this fractured trust may have been deliberately exacerbated, as part of a broader strategy to control Diana's environment and influence her behavior. Financial advisors and staff also played a role in Diana's inner circle. While their primary responsibility was practical, managing funds, scheduling travel, and ensuring logistics, they also served as intermediaries between Diana and external pressures. Accounts suggest that some of these advisors were caught between loyalty to Diana and allegiance to the palace, navigating competing directives that may have compromised their ability to fully protect her. Anne's insights suggest that even mundane administrative decisions could have profound implications, shaping the circumstances that ultimately culminated in the crash. Rivalries within the inner circle further complicated matters. Personal disagreements, conflicting perspectives, and differing risk tolerances created tension, leaving Diana in a position where she had to carefully weigh every choice. Some friends, motivated by genuine concern, may have unintentionally contributed to confusion or stress. Others, influenced by palace pressures, may have acted to direct her movements, relationships, or public engagements. The result was an environment in which even well-intentioned advice carried potential danger. Psychologically, the inner circle was a double-edged sword. While it provided emotional support, guidance, and protection, it also created a framework in which Diana was constantly navigating competing influences. Friends and aides acted as both shields and conduits, mediating pressures from the outside while also contributing to her stress. Princess Anne emphasizes that this environment of controlled access, competing loyalties, and subtle influence was a critical factor in understanding the months before the crash. Even Diana's closest friends had to operate under a veil of caution. Conversations were monitored, decisions were scrutinized, and advice had to be carefully calibrated. The inner circle's support was genuine, but it was also constrained by the broader power dynamics of the palace. Princess Anne's revelations suggest that the risks posed by this environment were not accidental. They reflected the mechanisms of control that the family historically exercised, and that in Diana's case, may have contributed to her vulnerability in ways that proved fatal. The interplay between loyalty and manipulation within Diana's inner circle underscores the complexity of her situation. Friends who genuinely cared for her often found themselves navigating conflicting pressures, while those with divided loyalties influenced circumstances in subtle but significant ways. Princess Anne's insights confirm that understanding these dynamics is essential. The people closest to Diana, both allies and adversaries, shaped the environment in which her final months unfolded. Ultimately, Diana's inner circle was a reflection of the broader pressures she faced. A microcosm of trust, influence, and risk. It was a network designed to support her, but one in which conflicting loyalties, palace pressures, and personal agendas created a precarious balance. Princess Anne's revelations underscore the significance of this network, illustrating how even those with the best intentions could be caught in forces beyond their control, and how these forces ultimately intersected with the fatal events of August 31st, 1997. When it comes to high-profile figures like Princess Diana, security is supposed to be absolute. Every route is planned, every threat assessed, every contingency accounted for. Yet the months leading up to August 31st, 1997, revealed alarming lapses in Diana's protection. And according to Princess Anne's revelations, these were not mere oversights. They were part of a broader pattern of manipulation that left Diana vulnerable in ways that had deadly consequences. From the beginning, Diana's security arrangements were paradoxical. She was constantly followed, yet allegedly left exposed at critical moments. Paparazzi were a persistent threat, and the palace had invested in sophisticated surveillance, bodyguards, and protocols. But insiders now say that these measures were inconsistently applied, sometimes deliberately so, and confirm that the environment surrounding Diana was often contradictory, designed to control without appearing overtly oppressive, and in the process, creating dangerous gaps that compromised her safety. One of the most glaring security anomalies was Henri Paul, the driver of the fatal Mercedes. Official reports initially blamed his alleged intoxication for the crash. But Princess Anne and other insiders have suggested that the circumstances around his presence and the choice of vehicle were suspicious. Why, for instance, would Diana, aware of the risks she faced, be placed in a car with a driver whose competence could be questioned? Some insiders argue that this decision, whether negligent or intentional, reflects a broader pattern of orchestrated exposure, an unsettling manipulation of the princess's environment to maximize risk. Security personnel also reported receiving conflicting instructions. Some were told to maintain strict protection, while others were subtly directed to relax vigilance at critical points. Princess Anne's observations indicate that this inconsistency was not accidental. It created a confusing, unpredictable environment in which Diana's movements could be monitored, restricted, or even manipulated according to interests that may have gone beyond her own safety. In short, the very people tasked with protecting her were caught in a system that undermined their effectiveness. Even seemingly minor lapses raise questions. The route taken to the Ritz Hotel in Paris, the timing of travel, and the placement of vehicles all appeared, in hindsight, unusually risky. Friends and bodyguards later described an air of uncertainty. Routes were changed, alternatives were eliminated, and contingency plans seemed deliberately constrained. Anne's revelations suggest that these accidents of planning were not random. They were consistent with a pattern of influence designed to increase Diana's vulnerability at crucial moments. The manipulation extended beyond physical security. Psychological tactics played a role as well. Friends and aides reported that Diana experienced subtle pressure to comply with schedules, avoid certain contacts, or maintain appearances despite her personal discomfort. These pressures, often framed as concern or protocol, contributed to a climate of tension that compounded her risks. Princess Anne emphasized that this was a hallmark of palace influence. Control is exerted indirectly through suggestion, timing, and selective information, rather than through overt coercion. Media coverage, intertwined with security lapses, magnified the danger. Paparazzi were relentless, and their pursuit of Diana on the night of the crash has been the subject of endless debate. Yet Anne's insights suggest that even the media's behavior may have been influenced or exploited. Strategic placement, timing of photographs, and coordinated pursuit created scenarios that heightened risk. In effect, security lapses and media manipulation worked hand in hand, shaping the environment in which Diana found herself on that fateful night. Bodyguard accounts further illuminate the breakdown. Trevor Rees-Jones, the sole survivor of the crash, later described a chaotic scene, with gaps in protective measures that should never have existed. Seats, positioning, and equipment that could have mitigated harm were either unavailable or improperly applied. Anne's revelations imply that these lapses were not coincidental, but reflective of systemic manipulation. An environment where the princess's vulnerability was inadvertently or deliberately amplified. Even internal communication failures contributed. Security staff received conflicting orders from various sources, creating confusion about priorities and procedures. Some reports indicate that higher-ups discouraged certain precautions, while emphasizing adherence to appearance and protocol. Princess Anne confirmed that such contradictions were characteristic of a culture in which institutional control often outweighed individual safety. In Diana's case, this tension became tragically apparent. It is also important to consider the timing of events. Days, even hours, before the crash, Diana's schedule was subjected to unusual constraints. Travel plans were altered, meetings were compressed, and security contingents were dispersed or redirected. These decisions, seemingly minor, coalesced into conditions that exposed Diana to maximum risk. Anne's commentary indicates that such timing was consistent with a broader strategy to shape outcomes without appearing overtly directive, a subtle but powerful form of manipulation. Further complicating matters was the coordination between security personnel and palace aides. While some were dedicated to her protection, others were concerned with appearances, narrative management, and maintaining protocol. This duality created conflict and gaps, leaving Diana with insufficient protective oversight at critical moments. Anne's insights underscore that the very system designed to safeguard her was compromised by competing priorities, a dangerous intersection of human error, institutional influence, and intentional oversight. Moreover, the night of the crash itself reveals the culmination of these lapses. The choice of tunnel, the speed of travel, and the positioning of vehicles suggest that Diana's exposure was extraordinarily high. While the crash has often been attributed to accident, the combination of security missteps, environmental manipulation, and human factors paints a more complex picture. Anne's revelations imply that the cumulative effect of these months of mismanagement or manipulation set the stage for a tragedy that could have been prevented. Even after the crash, security management was inconsistent. Responses by emergency personnel, coordination with hospitals, and the handling of information indicate systemic flaws in both preparation and reaction. Anne's insights suggest that these post-crash lapses were part of the same overarching pattern, demonstrating that the mechanisms of control and influence extended far beyond the immediate circumstances of the accident. Finally, the psychological impact of these lapses on Diana cannot be underestimated. Constant surveillance, inconsistent protection, and the sense of being manipulated created stress and heightened risk. Friends recall that Diana was increasingly cautious, yet also determined to assert her independence, and emphasizes that this tension between personal agency and institutional control was central to understanding her vulnerability in the months leading up to her death. The lessons from these security lapses and manipulations are clear. Protective measures, when inconsistently applied or deliberately undermined, can become instruments of vulnerability. Diana's death was not